In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where the streets are lined with manicured lawns and the air hums with the sound of weekend serenity, a confrontation was unfolding. A woman, her posture rigid, her face set in determination, stood firm in the middle of the street. Her target, a man behind the wheel of a truck, sat quietly, his hands resting on the steering wheel, his expression calm but resolute. "Why are you blocking my way?" he asked, his voice steady, carrying a weight of restrained patience. The woman didn't flinch. Her reply came sharp, cutting through the stillness. "You don't belong here." It was a statement loaded with meaning, an accusation that went unspoken yet unmistakable. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that her judgment would unravel into something far more unexpected than she was prepared for. In the moments that followed, perceptions would be shattered, truths revealed, and lives changed forever. This is a story of confrontation and consequence, one that leaves us questioning. How often do our assumptions blind us to reality, and what happens when we're forced to confront them head-on? Our story begins with James Carter, a man known not only for his calm demeanor, but for the impact he has quietly made in his community. A middle-aged professional, James carries himself with quiet confidence. He's impeccably dressed, his tie neatly fastened, his shoes polished to perfection. In the back of his truck sits a carefully packed box, a collection of valuable items destined for a charity auction, an event he helped organize to support underprivileged youth in the area. Earlier that morning, James had been in his small home office, meticulously arranging each item. A framed photo on his desk shows him shaking hands with local leaders at a community center he helped establish. His reputation as a philanthropist precedes him, but to James, these efforts are not about recognition, they're about making life better for others. As he closed the box and loaded it into his truck, he had no idea that the short drive to the venue would challenge everything he believed about human connection and justice. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, Karen Miller stood by her window, as she often did, sipping her morning coffee. Karen had lived in this affluent suburb for over 2 decades, and in her mind, she considered herself the unofficial guardian of its tranquility. Her neighbors knew her as someone who took her role seriously, perhaps too seriously. Karen's eyes scanned the street with practiced vigilance, noting anything that seemed out of place. To her, outsiders were unwelcome disruptions, threats to the harmony she had come to expect. Her assumptions weren't formed overnight. They were shaped by years of local gossip and whispered warnings about keeping the neighborhood safe. She prided herself on knowing who belonged and who didn't. It wasn't about malice, she told herself, but about maintaining order. Yet the lines between caution and prejudice had long since blurred in her mind. That morning, as James's truck rolled down her street, Karen's attention snapped to the unfamiliar vehicle. Her coffee forgotten, she stepped outside, her brow furrowed, suspicion etched into her expression. The quiet hum of the neighborhood's morning routine, the chirping of birds, the distant sound of sprinklers, provided an eerie contrast to the tension building at its core. The setting itself was almost idyllic. The streets were wide and lined with towering oak trees, their leaves casting dappled shadows on the pristine sidewalks. Houses stood tall, with manicured lawns and freshly painted fences. This was a place where every detail suggested stability and comfort. But appearances can be deceiving. As James approached, unaware of the reception awaiting him, Karen positioned herself squarely in the middle of the road. Her arms crossed, her body language unyielding, she waited. James slowed the truck, his expression shifting from calm to confused, as he realized she wasn't moving. This was no ordinary morning. It was the beginning of an encounter that would pull back the curtain on deeply rooted biases and test the strength of one man's patience in the face of unfounded suspicion. James Carter brought his truck to a halt, glancing at the woman standing firmly in his path. Her stance was deliberate, her gaze unyielding. From behind the windshield, James studied her expression, an unmistakable mix of suspicion and defiance. Lowering his window slightly, he addressed her calmly. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "Why are you blocking the road?" The woman's voice was curt and unwavering. "You don't belong here. What business do you have in this neighborhood?" James's brow furrowed slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I'm heading to the community center for an event." Karen's eyes narrowed. "I don't believe you. People like you. You shouldn't be here." The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. For a moment, the only sound was the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. James inhaled deeply, his years of experience in dealing with unjust assumptions guiding his response. "I'm not here to cause trouble, ma'am. I'm just passing through," he said. But Karen didn't budge. She reached for her phone, her movements deliberate and theatrical. "If you won't explain yourself, I'm calling the police," she declared. James leaned back slightly, his hands resting on the steering wheel. There was no trace of panic in his demeanor, only a quiet resilience. As Karen dialed, her voice became louder, echoing through the quiet street. "Yes, officer, there's a suspicious man in a truck on my street. He won't say why he's here. He's prowling around, and I feel unsafe." Karen's words carried an air of certainty, as though she had rehearsed them in her mind long before this moment. James watched her carefully, his face betraying no sign of the frustration he must have felt. It didn't take long for the scene to attract attention. Neighbors began to appear, drawn by Karen's raised voice. Some peeked from behind curtains. Others stepped onto their porches, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. Among them was Lisa Thompson, a resident who lived just a few doors down. Lisa hesitated for a moment before walking closer, her gaze shifting between Karen and James. Her voice broke the uneasy silence. "Karen," Lisa said cautiously, "what's going on?" "This man won't explain himself," Karen snapped, gesturing toward James. "I don't know what he's doing here, but he doesn't belong." Lisa frowned, looking at James more closely. Recognition flickered across her face. "Wait a minute. I know you. Aren't you James Carter? You're the guy who helped set up the community center fundraiser." Karen froze, her expression briefly faltering, but she quickly recovered, waving Lisa off dismissively. "I don't care who he says he is. He still shouldn't be here." James finally spoke again, his voice calm yet firm. "I have no intention of causing trouble. I'm here for a charity event. That's all." Karen wasn't convinced. "That's what they all say," she muttered under her breath. Before anyone could respond further, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The police had arrived. 2 officers stepped out of their patrol car, their expressions neutral as they approached the scene. Karen immediately moved toward them, her voice rising again. "Officers, I'm so glad you're here. This man has been loitering, and I'm sure he's up to no good." One of the officers turned his attention to James, who remained seated in his truck. But before he could speak, the other officer's face lit up with recognition. "Mr. Carter," the officer said warmly, "it's good to see you again. Are you here for the charity event today?" Karen's head snapped toward the officer. Confusion etched into her features. "Wait, you know him?" The officer nodded, his tone matter-of-fact. "Of course. Mr. Carter has been a pillar of this community for years. He's one of the main organizers for today's fundraiser." Karen's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The certainty she had clung to so fiercely was beginning to crumble. James stepped out of the truck slowly, his movements measured and deliberate. Standing tall, he looked at Karen for a long moment before turning to the officers. "Thank you for coming. I'm sorry this situation has taken up your time," he said. The tension in the air shifted as the crowd of neighbors murmured among themselves. Some were surprised, others looked uncomfortable as if questioning their own assumptions. Karen, however, remained rooted in place, struggling to process the revelation. James's composure never wavered. His next words were directed at Karen, spoken with a quiet strength. "I think it's clear now why I'm here. Perhaps next time we can avoid making quick judgments." The officer's warm greeting lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the tension that had consumed the scene moments earlier. James Carter stepped out of his truck, his movements unhurried, his presence commanding. The neighbors, once hesitant observers, now leaned closer, their curiosity growing with each passing second. Standing tall, James adjusted his tie, his voice steady but purposeful. "For those who don't know me," he began, "my name is James Carter. I'm here today to deliver items for the charity event at the community center, a fundraiser I've had the privilege of organizing for the past several years." His words carried a quiet dignity, a reminder of his role in fostering connection and support within the community. James didn't raise his voice or point fingers. Instead, his calm explanation served as a mirror, reflecting the assumptions that had led to this moment. The officer who recognized him nodded in agreement, addressing the crowd with a professional tone. "Mr. Carter has done a lot for this neighborhood and beyond. He's been instrumental in improving community programs, providing resources for underprivileged families, and creating opportunities for local youth. We're lucky to have him here." Karen stood frozen, her arms hanging awkwardly at her sides. The certainty with which she had blocked James's path was gone, replaced by a visible unease. Her eyes darted to the neighbors now gathering closer, their murmurs growing louder. "Wait," someone in the crowd spoke up, a woman clutching the hand of her young son. "Isn't this the same James Carter who helped fund the playground at the elementary school?" Another voice chimed in, a man stepping forward slightly. "Yeah, and the scholarship program for high school students. My niece got one of those scholarships." The murmurs of recognition grew, filling the space that moments ago had been tense with suspicion. Karen, meanwhile, seemed to shrink under the weight of the unfolding truth. Her gaze shifted from James to the neighbors, and then to the officers, who now stood firmly in support of him. James met Karen's eyes, his expression unwavering. "I don't know what you expected to find when you stopped me here today," he said, his tone even. "But I hope this moment will make us all think about the assumptions we carry and the harm they can cause." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated, unable to find the words. The crowd's quiet judgment had shifted toward her, and the weight of their collective disapproval was unmistakable. The officer nearest to her broke the silence. "Ma'am," he said gently but firmly, "it's important to be cautious, but it's equally important not to jump to conclusions about people without understanding the full story." Karen's cheeks flushed, and for the first time she appeared genuinely reflective. Her stance softened, and she took a small step back, as though retreating from the spotlight of her own making. James, however, showed no signs of anger or triumph. Instead, he turned toward his truck, ready to continue his journey to the community center. But before he got back in, a young boy from the crowd ran up to him, holding out a small drawing. "Mr. Carter," the boy said shyly, "thank you for the soccer nets you gave us. They're the best." James knelt, taking the drawing with a warm smile. "You're welcome. And remember, always play with heart." The moment softened the atmosphere, shifting the focus from confrontation to community. The neighbors, now fully understanding the man Karen had accused, began to approach James, offering apologies and thanks. Karen remained on the periphery, watching silently. As James drove off, the scene lingered in the minds of those who witnessed it. For Karen, it became a moment of reckoning. In the days that followed, she avoided her usual morning routine of watching the neighborhood from her window. Instead, she began to spend more time reflecting on her actions. The community center event was a success, with James receiving recognition for his continued efforts. Pictures from the event spread through the local news, accompanied by stories of his impact on the neighborhood. Karen couldn't avoid seeing them, and while she remained silent about her role in the confrontation, her demeanor around the neighborhood began to change. Some neighbors noticed her newfound quietness and her reduced eagerness to question the unfamiliar. It was subtle, but undeniable, a small sign that perhaps, in her way, she was beginning to question the biases that had driven her actions that morning. Narrator's reflection, with a closing call to thought. In moments of conflict, the truth has a way of surfacing, not through force, but through the quiet power of patience and character. James Carter's grace in the face of judgment turned an act of prejudice into an opportunity for reflection. How often do we judge before we understand? How often do we let fear cloud our perception of others? Perhaps this story is a reminder that it's not too late to unlearn, to listen, and to see the world through a broader lens. What would you do in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like and share it to spark conversations that matter. As James Carter drove away, the weight of the morning's events stayed with everyone who had witnessed it. His quiet strength in the face of unfounded judgment left a mark far greater than any argument ever could. For James, this moment wasn't just about defending himself. It was about reminding everyone of the shared responsibility to create a better, more understanding world. Later that afternoon, at the charity event, James addressed the gathered crowd. The community center buzzed with activity, families laughing, children playing, and volunteers working together to make the event a success. Standing at the podium, James's voice carried a steady conviction. "We all have a role to play in breaking down these walls of fear and ignorance," he said, his words resonating deeply with the diverse audience before him. "It starts with the choices we make every day, seeing the humanity in others, listening and acting with kindness. Together we can build a community where everyone feels they belong." This story reminds us of the power of calm persistence and the need to confront our biases. James Carter's journey today was not just his own. It was a lesson for all of us about the importance of understanding, empathy, and the strength it takes to stand tall in the face of adversity. What would you do in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and together we can spark the conversations that lead to change. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, and share it to help spread awareness. Stories like this have the power to inspire reflection, foster dialogue, and create a world where compassion triumphs over division.